Hi, and welcome to our third video in this series. If you remember, in our first video, we talked about simple sentences, and we said a simple sentence was an independent clause. Then in our second video, we talked about taking two simple sentences, two independent clauses, and joining them together with one of the fanboys to make a compound sentence. Now in this video, we want to talk about making complex sentences. So what is a complex sentence? A complex sentence is when we combine two or more independent clauses with subordinating conjunctions. For instance, let's take two simple sentences. Let's say the first one is, Thomas Edison invented the light bulb. And the next one is, people did not need to use kerosene lights. Now, the relationship between these two sentences is not really clear. But if we combine them by adding a subordinating conjunction, let's say after, to our first sentence and change this period to a comma, now we have a complex sentence. And the relationship then becomes clearer. After Thomas Edison invented the light bulb, people did not need to use kerosene lights. Notice what happened to our first sentence. It was an independent clause. But when we added after, it became a dependent clause. In other words, now it needs the support from an independent clause. Now I said we could combine two or more sentences together to make a complex sentence, right? So we could actually add another dependent clause to our sentence. We could say, after Thomas Edison invented the light bulb, people did not need to use kerosene lights because light bulbs were more convenient. So here we have a dependent clause, an independent clause, and a dependent clause. Now we can also combine a compound sentence with a complex sentence. Let's take the same example we just used. After Thomas Edison invented the light bulb, people did not need to use kerosene lights, but it took them a long time to change. Here's our dependent clause, and here's our compound sentence. Let's look now at three more examples, and let's use the subordinating conjunctions because, after, when, and although. The first example is, students study hard. They need to get enough exercise. Looking at the subordinators, because, after, when, and although, which of the four would you use? If you want to show reason, you could use because. Because students study hard, they need to get enough exercise. If you want to refer to time, you could use after or maybe when. After students study hard, they need to get enough exercise. And we wouldn't want to use although, because it really doesn't work well with our sentences. Let's look now at one more example. How would you join these two sentences? The cafeteria changed its menu. Students prefer to eat at local restaurants. It's obvious there's a contrast between these two sentences. The cafeteria changed its menu, probably hoping to have more students eat there. But the students preferred local restaurants. Although is the subordinator, that means contrast or but. So let's try using it. Although the cafeteria changed its menu, students prefer to eat at local restaurants. And I think I would add the word still right here. Although the cafeteria changed its menu, students still prefer to eat at local restaurants. At this point, we need to stop and talk about the comma rule. When the dependent clause comes first, we use a comma. When the independent clause comes first, we don't use a comma. It's like this. Here's a dependent clause, and here is an independent clause. After the students graduate, they will begin their research project. Now let's put the independent clause first. The students will begin their research project after they graduate. Notice in our second sentence, there is no comma. Now that we have a basic understanding of complex sentences, we need to take a few minutes and look at a common error, sentence fragments. If we use a period after a dependent clause, what we're trying to do is make a dependent clause into an independent clause. But it really doesn't work. What we have is just a sentence fragment. Look at this example. Although the sun was shining, period. This sentence doesn't give us a complete idea or a complete picture because the independent clause is missing. Even if we say, although the sun was shining, period, it wasn't warm, we still have a sentence fragment. We need to connect the dependent clause to the independent clause by putting a comma here. Although the sun was shining, comma, it wasn't warm. Now we have a complete sentence. There's just two more things we need to talk about. The first one is using relative pronouns in complex sentences. For example, the doctor whose office is in Becker Building is helping in Africa. Here, whose office is in Becker Building is the dependent clause. The doctor is helping in Africa is the independent clause. Let's look at one more example. Thomas Edison, who made over 1,000 inventions, died at the age of 84 in 1931. Again, who made over 1,000 inventions is the dependent clause, and Thomas Edison died at the age of 84 in 1931 is the independent clause. Now, the second thing we need to talk about are reductions. Let's use this complex sentence for example. We can reduce the dependent clause because the subject is the same as in the independent clause. We're going to reduce it by moving the proper noun to the independent clause and changing the verb to the ing form. Now our sentence reads, before becoming involved in politics, Abraham Lincoln was a shopkeeper. So what is a complex sentence? It is when we combine two or more independent clauses with a subordinating conjunction. Well, that's all for today. Make sure you read the handouts below, and I'll see you next time.